UFC Fight Night, Sergei Pavlovich versus Blaydes. We got a great fight card coming up this weekend, taking place at the Apex in Las Vegas. Today I will be providing my breakdown of each of the fights with the betting lines and emphasis on picks, and all within the scope of a gambling perspective primarily. But let's get right into it. Our first fight we have is Danaa Batgerel versus Brady Hiestand. I'm going to be taking Brady Hiestand in this matchup. Hiestand is a plus 126 underdog, 3-2 in his last 5. With Batgerel being the favorite in this. I think Danaa, his KO line is very live in this matchup. Hiestand did get hit a lot in his previous bout, but I think beyond that KO threat early on in the fight, in the first round and partway through the second round, I think Danaa really falls off after that. After the second round, he seems to gas out at times, and as the fight goes on, he slows up and he doesn't really carry his power well later on into the fight. Brady Hiestand, I think he has decent enough wrestling to be able to take down Danaa once he gets tired, especially. So there could be a potential live betting opportunity in this fight if Danaa comes out and is really firing a lot, throwing a lot at Hiestand, and if he's able to withstand that, then I think he should be able to win a decision here. So Hiestand by decision is the pick. Next up is Priscila Cachoeira versus Karine Silva. Karine Silva is 5-0 in her last 5. She's a minus 174 favorite. Cachoeira, on the other hand, is also 4-1 at plus 136 odds. Cachoeira is the pick here at those odds. Karine seems to be more of a submission specialist, and Priscila has only been subbed by Gillian Robertson and Valentina Shevchenko. So my guess is Karine is not as slick, certainly not as good as Gillian, and I would not assume she's as good as Valentina on the ground either. Obviously, Valentina is a stand-up specialist, but her submission wins, I think, have just been more dominant than what Karine is putting out there, especially Valentina has proven that she's been able to submit high-level competition like Cachoeira. So I don't see Karine being able to lock in any submissions here. Cachoeira has a decent power, especially for the division. I think she could get a KO here and end that win streak of Silva. If not, then I think she should be able to strike her way to a decision win. So Cachoeira is the pick. Next up is William Gomis. I don't know if it's Gomis or Gomis. Hailing from Paris, France. He's 1-0 in the UFC, 11-2 overall, and he's sitting at about plus 180 odds right now. And he will be taking on the undefeated prospect Francis Marshall. I'm taking Francis Marshall in this fight. He's sitting at minus 210 odds, and frankly, I don't see a scenario where he loses this fight. Gomis did not impress too much in his UFC debut. He wasn't as dominant on the feet against a lower-level opponent as one would hope. He did win most of the grappling exchanges in that fight, but I don't foresee him out-grappling Francis Marshall at all. Marshall looks a lot more physically imposing, more explosive on the feet. And Gomis seemed to have his not be the most defensively sound, especially when things got close in his fight. Sometimes left his chin exposed a few times. And Marshall is really good fighting on the inside with short hooks and things of that nature. Gomis, I think he's an interesting prospect, and he throws a lot of the, spinning, kung fu, all that shit, but I don't know how much success you can really have relying on that in the UFC. So Francis Marshall's the pick here, and I think he wins by KO, and really announces his arrival in the division. What division is that? Featherweight. Okay. Yeah, Francis Marshall could be a problem at 145, definitely. And I think he really proves that this weekend. Next is Junior Tafa versus Mohamed Usman. This fight is a pick'em. It's the battle of the brothers. Junior Tafa being the younger brother of Justin Tafa, I believe. And obviously, Mohamed Usman is Kamaru's little brother. The guy's massive. I do not get, I don't know. Maybe they have different mothers. I don't know what the deal is there. They certainly don't look too much alike. I guess they're both bald. But all that aside, this is a really interesting matchup. Two guys with very little relative MMA experience. Junior Tafa does have a kickboxing background that he was fairly successful in, and he's a younger guy. Mohamed Usman, on the other hand, is a bit older. He's in his 30s, but had the Ultimate Fighter win, that big win over Pauga, the rugby guy. So, he's got another Polynesian. I don't want to make any assumptions. I believe Junior Tafa is Polynesian. And this fight is really interesting. I think Tafa's going to have the advantage on the feet, but I don't know how much. And Usman clearly has a decent amount of power. Tafa seems to be the sharp pick here. He was a massive favorite before a bunch of people bet Usman's line all the way down to, I think at one point Usman was like plus 200 and they bet him all the way down to an even line. So if I had the odds, I think Usman would be the smart pick here, but if it's a pick'em, I think Tafa, I'm leaning his way just with the striking advantage. There was footage of him training with famous boxer David Tua, one of the all-time great heavyweight boxers of the 90s and early 2000s. Guy's a legend, so for that alone, I'm picking Junior Tafa. Moving on is Norma Dumont versus Karol Rosa. This is an interesting matchup. Dumont it's pretty much a even line between the two of them. Dumont's 4-1 in her last 4, as well as Karol Rosa. And I see Norma Dumont having a advantage on the feet here and a good enough takedown defense to defend against any Rosa's takedowns. I saw that Rosa kind of seems to, I guess I don't want to say depend on the takedown, but she does have some of her instincts are to shoot for takedowns when she's not really sure what else to do. And I think against Dumont, she's going to get stuffed a lot, and Dumont's going to be able to control this fight wherever she wants to control it. So Dumont is the pick. Next is Montel Jackson versus Rani Yahya. Montel Jackson is the biggest favorite on the card, I believe. He's 4-1 in his last 5. Rani Yahya is 3-1-1 in his last 5 and sitting at plus 430 odds. I would really caution against throwing Montel Jackson into any parlays to get basically no value just for the risk that Yahya poses on the ground. Being a jiu-jitsu and grappling specialist, there is always that submission threat, but I do think a KO line for Montel is pretty live, around 1 KO even. Yahya doesn't have the best defense on the feet, and I think the speed advantage is going to be startling. So Montel Jackson, I could see him getting a quick finish in this one. And so Jackson by KO is the pick. Next up is Christos Giagos versus Ricky Glenn. Christos is the plus 154 underdog. Ricky Glenn is sitting at minus 205. Giagos is 2-3 in his last 5, and Ricky Glenn is 2-1. Ricky Glenn did impress in his most recent fight versus Grant Dawson, who Grant Dawson certainly is showing to be a problem in the division. Glenn showed his durability in that fight, ended the fight in a dominant position, and was able to keep it really close, and he showed a good fight IQ in that one. I think that one ended in a draw, I want to say. So that all impressed, but that fight was over a year ago, and the inactivity from Ricky Glenn, especially someone at his age and stage in his career, is a bit concerning. Christos has been in the octagon more in recent years, and he's really going to be looking for a win, so I'm going to go with Christos to get the win here over Ricky Glenn. Next up is Matthew Semelsberger versus Jeremiah Wells. Semelsberger is 2-3 in his last 5, and Jeremiah Wells is 5-0 in his last 5. Despite that, this fight is a pick'em between them two. I'm just gonna fact check that really quick. Is the Jedi really 2-3 in his last 5? No, he's 3-2. With his most recent victory being over Jake Matthews. So excuse me, he's 3-2 in his last 5. That makes more sense. I'm going with Semi the Jedi here, honestly by KO. He really impressed versus Jake Matthews, who I think has slicker striking than Jeremiah Wells. Wells is pretty explosive, but the pitfall with that is he does sort of swing for the fences a lot and tries to rely on his power. Where I think Semelsberger also has crazy KO power, but is just a little more concise in his striking, throws straighter punches. I can see Jeremiah Wells winging a hook at Semelsberger, and Semelsberger just his punch landing first and potentially getting a stop here. So I'm riding with the Jedi. Next up is Iasmin Lucindo versus Brogan Walker. Lucindo is a major favorite at minus 310 here. Brogan Walker is 1-1 in the UFC, with her most recent loss coming against Juliana Miller. I'm going with Lucindo in this fight. Her only loss is versus Iasmin Uruguay, who is definitely a name to look out for in the division. And that is not really a bad loss by any means. Brogan Walker, on the other hand, that Juliana Miller loss is a bit concerning, considering Juliana really got exposed in her most recent fight. So obviously, MMA math that doesn't really work. I beat this person who's better than the person you beat, therefore I'm better. Obviously, that isn't the case and rarely is the case, but regardless, I still think it's drastic enough in this case to warrant influencing our pick here. So Lucindo by KO is the pick here. I just don't think Brogan is nearly on her level. Next up is Jared Gordon versus Bobby Green. Jared Gordon is 3-2, with obviously one of those losses being a win over Paddy Pimblett. Let's call it what it is. There's just no chance he, in any scoring criteria, any judges you should put on there, he should win that fight 10 times out of 10. So we don't even need to get into that. So let's just call it 4-1 with a moral victory in there. And he's fighting Bobby Green, who's 2-3 in his last 5, coming off that KO loss to Drew Dober. And in spite of this, Bobby Green is a major favorite in this one. the line is not making sense to me, to be honest, especially when you consider Bobby Green coming off of a KO really not all that long ago. Even though he looked really good in that fight, you have to wonder how that KO is going to affect him and his confidence in this one. Jared Gordon hits hard. Obviously, he's not a striker on the level of Drew Dober, but I think he mixes in the wrestling really well, and at these odds, I think he's definitely a value play here. Bobby Green does have good takedown defense, all things considered, but I think Gordon's definitely has the leg up in the grappling, and he should be able to push him up on the cage and I think bully Bobby Green a little bit here. So Jared Gordon is the pick here. I do think a Bobby Green win here sets up a Paddy Pimblett versus Bobby Green matchup. And I don't think Bobby really cares about getting a proper training camp in. I think they could aim to throw that Pimblett fight on the July card in the O2 that they just announced in London. So, and I think what that would do is, I think Paddy would love that fight, because then, especially if Bobby Green comes out and beats Jared Gordon somewhat convincingly, then Paddy can get a win over Bobby Green and sort of just be like, look, I just starked this guy and he just beat Jared Gordon, and he can sort of have that in his back pocket, so he doesn't really have to, he doesn't have to deal with as much backlash for that fluky win versus Jared Gordon. So just a thought. I think a Bobby Green win here would set up a Paddy Pimblett matchup that seems to make a lot of sense, but that's if he wins, which I'm not totally anticipating. The co-main in this card is Brad Tavares. He's 2-3 in his last 5, and he's the favorite in this matchup, versus Bruno Silva, who's sitting at plus 130 odds, who's 3-2 in his last 5, coming off of losses versus Alex Pereira and Gerald Meerschaert. So Bruno was a guy I honestly, if you had asked me a year ago, I would have had him as a guy to look out for in the division. He was on a crazy win streak dating back to before he was in the UFC. Even in the UFC, he had multiple finishes. The guy was looking like a killer. And then he went and faced Pereira. Obviously, he didn't get KO'd, but took a lot of damage in that fight. And I don't think anyone really expected him to hang on the feet, win a stand-up matchup versus Alex. That's just unrealistic against a kickboxer of that caliber. But the amount of times he got rocked was definitely concerning. And then his loss to Gerald Meerschaert, certainly he did not look good in that fight at all. Gerald is a respectable opponent and pretty much dominated that matchup start to finish. So Silva does seem to have taken a step back. And I don't know exactly why that would be. Perhaps it's, all the miles he has in the cage catching up to him, or it's just the level of opponents. But I think Brad Tavares is experienced enough and has enough power here to give Bruno Silva some problems. Silva does seem to have issues fighting guys with power in their hands. That seems to throw him off of his game. So Tavares is the pick here. I don't think he gets a finish. He only has 2 finishes in his UFC career. But the amount of times I've seen that stat thrown around on Twitter and stuff almost makes me feel like this might be the outlier, and he does get a finish versus Bruno Silva. So I don't think a KO pick is too bad in this matchup either. And then finally, we're at our main event, Sergei Pavlovich versus Curtis Blaydes. These guys really don't need much of an introduction, but just quick breakdown. Pavlovich is the plus 144 underdog here, which was a bit shocking to me. He's 5-0 in his last 5, only 1 loss in the UFC, which was to Overeem back in the day. That was his first fight. And Curtis Blaydes is 4-1 in his last 5 and is a -186 favorite here. Curtis Blaydes definitely has proven that he's one of the top guys in the division, and he's been one of the top guys in the division for some time now. He's had a couple KO losses just throughout his career, obviously versus Francis and Derek Lewis, the two guys with the heaviest hands maybe ever in the heavyweight division. So that's not something to take away too much from him for suffering KO losses, but even in some of those fights, he had success against Francis. Certainly in the first fight, he had success against Francis. And his matchup versus Derek Lewis, he had success as well before he got put out. Curtis has great wrestling. He's a Chicago guy, which I love. He's solid on the feet. I don't think he's one of the better strikers of that top 10, but he's certainly very good on the feet. And so he just has that sort of can do it everywhere skill set. Can take you down, control you on the ground and pound, can handle himself on the feet. Definitely a guy deserving of a main event spot on a card, and definitely a guy deserving of a lot of respect in the heavyweight division. That being said, his dance partner in this one, that's a John Anik line, is just a fucking gorilla. The guy, and when I say gorilla, I'm basing that off of, they actually showed the graphic of the ape index, which is like height to reach ratio, a measure of like the ratio to how long your arms are to how tall you are. And he is the highest, I believe, in the UFC, even more so than John Jones, has a freakishly long reach. So yeah, he's a Russian gorilla. So I really think people are overthinking this one. Curtis Blaydes, good fighter, but when it comes to the 265ers, who hits harder? I mean, that's what I'm looking at here. Like, do you want to take the guy who's pretty good everywhere, or do you want to take the guy with, cement blocks for hands? So, like, we have yet to really see Pavlovich have to defend a takedown because he has so many KOs so quickly. He did have to fight off his back versus Overeem after he got knocked down, but that's not something I'm giving a whole lot of weight to, considering it was his first fight. He was 26 years old. I think that gap from 26 to 30 is monumental. I mean, that's like a lifetime of fighting experience just in those 4 years. So I really think people are overthinking this. Pavlovich, punch hard. Curtis, punch hard, but not quite as hard. That's all I really need to hear. So Pavlovich is the pick here by KO, which I saw the odds are not a whole lot different than just his money line odds, certainly because he's gotten so many KO wins, and he's not gonna play games. I think the biggest thing that impresses me about Sergei is how he approaches someone when he rocks them, which he's gonna rock you. That's a given when you're fighting a guy with that reach, that striking ability. He's gonna find your chin sooner or later. I think it just comes down to, can you take it or not? And when he has guys rocked, he shows great composure, like versus Tai Tuivasa. Obviously, Tai has like T-Rex arms, which definitely did not help him in that fight because he just like couldn't reach Pavlo. Like the distance was too much for him to overcome. But you still saw Sergei be so disciplined when chasing down the finish, not getting too horny for a KO win, and just letting things sort of come to him. So for those reasons, I'm taking Pavlovich by KO in this matchup. And those are my picks. If you agree with me or if you disagree, drop a comment. like or dislike, let me know how you really feel. If there's any ways I can improve the channel, let me know down below. And subscribe and enjoy the fights this weekend. So I'll see y'all later.